you hear me, anybody?
I can hear
All
you.
right.
Oh, good.
Looks like we're ready.
Might have to move my router. I lost you for a moment.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another BiotensegriTea party. Today with special guests, Doug Johnson and Melanie Sever. I'm Susan Lowell de Solorzano, coming to you from the sleepy little town of Washington, D.C. in the United States. And I'm here with my co-hosts, Graham Scar.
Hello, I'm in sunny Nottingham in the UK, the home of Robin Hood and his merry men.
Thanks, Graham. And Chris Marita Clancy, who is going to be is going to be taking a low profile today. There you go. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Clancy, coming to you from just outside of Vancouver on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish Nation.
So a lot of you know Doug and Melanie. They've been on tea parties before. If you haven't seen those, I highly recommend you check them out. Doug serves as a board member for the Stephen M. Levin Biotensegrity Archive, and there's the Stephen M. Levin guy there waving to us. Hi, Steve.
Hi.
The archive's a 501c3 nonprofit organization here in the United States, and we are grateful for your donations as we try to be responsible with whatever we get and run on a shoestring, mostly with volunteers, and try to use the money to support things like research and education. All right, Melanie's gonna kick it off with a toast.
Raise our glasses and toast the beginning of today's tea party.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, everyone.
L'chaim. Wonderful. Doug, I think I should just turn it right over to you. What do you think?
Sounds good.
All right, so I'm going to disappear, and Janet, thanks for joining us. I see you're here from Florida, right? We'll talk later. That's okay. Sorry. All right. Go over to you, Doug.
So actually, I think I'm going to start to play something particularly for Steve, but for everybody. Steve loves music and loves jazz, and that's always a beautiful connection. And so I'm going to play a piece called Ain't Misbehavin'.
Ooh, I love that one.
through. Okay, just have a few
It came
notes
through
here.
beautifully. It came through
Oh.
beautifully, and it makes it feel like a party.
Excellent, excellent. Not just a tea party. Wanted to share with everybody some interfaces, as I said in the description, between our understanding of biotensegrity and what biotensegrity has done for all of us in this community, but also how that relates to musicians and what musicians do. And I expect most everybody here is some sort of movement practitioner or therapist, and at points you probably work with musicians. And hopefully Melanie and I will give you some ideas about how you can be more effective, or in that you'll understand how you can help musicians. One of the most helpful things for me at one point in just framing the whole question, first of all, it's helpful to realize lots of musicians end up having pain, movement issues and pain specifically. They often go to doctors, and doctors and physical therapists don't necessarily have the tools to help them. And one helpful way to frame things for them, to help them understand and help you understand, is that the things that help musicians eliminate pain are the same things that help them play better and better and play more efficiently. So it's really a continuum. Most musicians look at it like, if they're having pain, it's a fire, and they want to call the fire department, have them put out the fire, and never think about it again. But it's almost always a movement issue or an interface issue or connection of their movement and physically their contact with the instrument that's the proximal cause of their issues. So help dealing with those enough that it gets rid of the pain, gets rid of those kinds of issues, also helps get rid of limitations in their ability to do what they want to do with freedom and ease of their instrument. So just that idea that we're dealing with a continuum, I think, is really helpful, and we'll see how that relates to ways that we can think about working with movements and making improvements in general. I first met Steve, gosh, it's like maybe 10 years ago now, and I was taking my daughter down to college, and I just decided, I'd been reading about tensegrity and getting very excited about it, and I wrote him, and he very graciously met me in a hotel lobby when we were coming through Arlington. We talked for a solid 2 hours, it might have been more. And it was thrilling, and I learned so much. One of the interesting challenges that I had been having in trying to understand this concept is that, on the one hand, we can say tensegrities are always balanced, and they are always optimal in their balance of forces. And so living things are tensegrities, so they're always optimal. Except in obvious ways we can see how that's not the case. Somebody's having an issue, or we're having an issue ourselves, and we make some adjustments, and something in the system changes, so we're more integrated, whatever that could mean, different things, we might talk about that, but certainly functioning in a more optimal way. And it isn't just about issues of getting rid of pain or some sort of something we might call a pathology, but when we're dealing with performance, when we're dealing with athletes, musicians, dancers, we're also, what we're really looking for is, as much as anything, is optimizing function. And when we understand that as a continuum when we're working with somebody and getting rid of their issue with pain, when they're doing a certain thing with their instrument, and then continuing to helping them play better, it's really helpful to view that in that terms of optimizing function. And that's a term Steve gave me at that time. So that, what you're really talking about is optimizing function. One of the things that Steve brought up, I can't remember at that time, or it was after, but it's something we've talked about a number of times, is the system of Dr. John Menel, who Steve studied with, And this concept I think he came up with later, but he can clarify this, and please feel free to jump in anytime. But looking at the body instead of in this allopathic hospital disease system that we're used to thinking of, but looking at the body and certain conditions as questions about the function of the dynamical system of the body. So if we have some sort of dysfunction or limitation in the function of the dynamical system of the tensegrity system in the body, then that's this other way of naming these conditions or diseases, which would be dynamical disease. It's a dynamical disease model, which I don't think is really caught on, but it's a shame. And I think understanding what's happening with the way we experience tensegrity in our work, this is really essential. So one of the things, I think the primary thing that Dr. Manel really focused on was this idea of joint play. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with it, but in case not, it's really worth going through. So the idea is that at every joint, there's a range of motion that joint has, which can be controlled and guided with muscles. So when we think about the movements of this metacarpal phalangeal joint, well, we have abduction, adduction, flexion, and extension, and circumduction that we can make with that. But the joint play is movements that are available, but they're passive. So I can distract that joint. I can axially rotate that joint. And I'm not sure if he was the original person that came up with this understanding, but that if those passive motions, which is the joint play, are available, then that joint can function well in its normal range of motion. But if there's a lack of joint play, then there's dysfunction in that joint. But the fascinating thing is how a lack of motion or the lack of that joint play in one place can affect the whole system. And without this biotensegrity model that has been so central to our understanding of so many things in our work, it's really hard to make sense of that. How could a little lack of movement in my finger affect the way my sensory system works, the way my mobility functions? But seeing as a global system, it starts to make more sense. There are different types of work that are similar to this. So when we have mechanical, I'm just using these terms as best I can, mechanical restrictions. So there's something actually there that isn't moving, and then there's treatments or release that somebody can you do, I'm missing the proper word here, to release that. Similarly, what a chiropractor does, an adjustment in the spine or a rib, that it's not something you can do yourself, but there's actually this mechanical restriction. It also makes a lot of sense how scar tissue work, people who do scar tissue work and work with adhesions, how this model of the dynamical disease and just the whole biotensegrity framework would make so much sense for them. But these are all things that need interventions. So many other kinds of restrictions or limitations are not at all mechanical. They're not pathological in that sense. They're just habitual. And there's a number of reasons why people limit themselves, and a lot of things with musicians specifically. And some of those will give you a sense of that. Now I'm going to shift to one of these presentations here. When I work with a group of musicians in a class or a workshop, I was just traveling down in Mexico for Berkeley. I like to ask them about what tension means to them. And almost always when I have a group of students come into a class, a body mapping class I teach at Berkeley, and ask them what they would like to work with, what they'd like to improve, how they'd like to change their experience of making music and playing their instrument. They almost always say, I have too much tension. I'd like to relax more. I'd like to have less tension. So it's almost always phrased in terms of tension. So this idea of too much tension. And then invariably, if you feel like you have too much tension, you try to relax. And teachers all the time, music teachers all the time, will say things like, you know, you just need to sing the phrase in your mind and relax and have it flow. And sometimes, of course, this will work, especially if the teacher is modeling beautiful musicianship and movement, but sometimes it creates new problems. And so it's helpful to explore what we mean by tension. If I ask a group of musicians, is tension good or bad? It's obviously a loaded question, but is tension good or bad? And almost invariably, people's gut feeling is very strong. Tension is bad. I got to get rid of tension. And it's a very helpful thing to explore, just something that's very clear. There is no sound without tension. And for musicians, that's important. So we have some fun models of vibrating strings. Just for fun. This is not right on the left because they're all moving at the same speed, but I still have it up there. So this is the harmonic series. So one string vibrating over here, that's the fundamental, that's the slowest vibration, and this one's going twice as fast, and the pitch is an octave higher, and then a fifth higher, and then so that whole harmonic sequence, just for curiosity there. But it's an obvious and important thing. Every instrument that we play has tension in that system. Anything with a string, the string is under tension, a drum head is under tension. Our vocal cords, we don't want excess tension in our neck and our throat and around the vocal mechanism, but we're controlling tension of the vocal cords to create sound. The first thing a violinist does when they take their bow out of the case is pre-tension it. They put the tension in that bow because they loosen it up and the strings are all, the horsehairs are all floppy. And just lovely images from both these great musicians. There's Heifetz on the left and Jaco Pastorius on the right with quite extraordinary spider hands. And it's also helpful to just consider springs. I've never ever had a student or a client or somebody coming from help say, I'm too springy. Please help me get rid of my springiness. I'm bouncing off the walls. I think when you ask somebody about springiness, everybody realizes that's a useful, important, good thing. It feels good when we remember what it was like when we were children. We remember that feeling of springiness. When you see an animal, a dog running around that's excited, they're just so springy and bouncy and an obvious good. And it's also obvious, everybody knows the springs have tension. So when people say, I have too much tension, it's really helpful to clarify what it is they're actually talking about. Some just other examples in many activities. So I think that's Michael Jordan. Remember that picture of his tongue for later. Helpful thing to also realize is that tensegrity is globally a spring, a very specialized spring, and that's, if we just think of a steel spring, it has a fixed tension. But one of the things we have the ability to do is constantly modify the tension of our springiness, our spring, for what's appropriate for the moment. So 3 different racket sports, very, very different amounts of tension or effort that is required to just hold that. If you try to hold a tennis racket like you hold the ping pong paddle, it will just blow out of your hand. Also helpful to realize, and you can really see here, I think, or at least extrapolate with some of these, is that the amount of springiness, effort, tension in the interface with their racket is a global thing. You don't just say, I need to squeeze my hand tighter, and so to hold the tennis racket, for instance. So conceiving of that, looking for that full body unified amount of activity, intention, and effort is something that is, I think, arguably very clearly the design. But what's helpful to also realize is that that fails sometimes. And the more we have the ability, whether conscious or not, to modify so many different aspects, the more things can get potentially out of whack. Just think of walking and then taking a step off a curb. That difference in acceleration just to move 8 inches down a curb, you need to adjust your body. And if we don't, then we really feel that impact. So when musicians speak of tension, what invariably they really mean is something very different, which is locking. So if somebody is complaining of their wrist being tense, if you go to palpate their wrist, it's just immobilized, it's totally locked. There's no springiness at all. So just some different words that can be useful. Tightening. So, and certainly muscular tension is involved, but it's a very different thing if we think about a spring that's mobile all the way through, or a tensegrity model that's mobile all the way through. So when we freeze apart, we've effectively done exactly, analogously, what Dr. Manel was discussing. So if he found if there was some joint that lacked joint play, that was essentially frozen in some aspect, that needed to be fixed for the whole system to work well. So if any of us have an activity where we end up locking part of us, our ribs, very commonplace, AO joint, very commonplace, tightening the jaw, tightening the tongue, it's with the biotensegrity model, it makes sense why that has this global impact. And while certain things need to be adjusted by a professional, so many of these things can be, if we understand that we are locking in certain aspects and why we're doing it, then we have the ability to just make a change. So immobilizing well. And the effect of it all, importantly, is fragmenting the body, which we'll go into a little more. And this antidote for tension, quote unquote tension, which is locking, is usually to relax. And so we end up getting a collapse in the system, which just causes more problems. And effectively a drop, a collapse. And what we really do is we relinquish the support that's part of our structure. And when we are on this, we can end up on a pendulum swing very easily, finding that we're locked, thinking it's about tension, and then intending to relax to address that, we end up collapsing. So we end up tightening, locking, collapsing other parts. So instead of locking or dropping, we can choose to unlock and mobilize. That I expect that might sound just ridiculously obvious to people. However, in my experience, that's not something people tend to do when they're sitting at their instrument. When somebody's using their correct posture, their idea of what they're supposed to be doing, presenting at their instrument, it's often very challenging them to get to move, little bits of their ribs move and their spine is moving, especially when it comes to flexion and extension. They tend to have been taught, sit up straight, shoulders down and back, and they think, okay, I'm just going to relax my shoulders. It often doesn't help at all. But actually mobilizing to the degree that it extends through the ribs, through the spine, through the hip joint, through the legs, all the way down to the floor, then you actually have a kind of phase change in the body when everything connects and integrates. And then have a chance of obviously finding this natural state of springiness. Why do we walk? I think this is true for everybody, but once again, I'm also focusing on musicians. If you think about a singer standing up to sing, I like to just present this picture. I think this is the Washington Monument, isn't it? Do you feel like you have more in common with this, or is this a better model for how you're organized, or this? And I would just encourage everybody, even though I'm preaching to the choir here, it'd be interesting, those maps that we have, those, if you had a parent, usually some mother it seems, that told you to sit up straight for 8 years when you were young, that you might have a residual ringing map of, yeah, that's what I should be, that's what my spine should be in that Washington Monument. Something incredibly different here and wonderfully fluid and beautiful. I expect many of you have seen this before. But everything's moving in relation to everything else. The spots show us so nicely. The eyes and the head is still in relation to it, but it's still everything is adjusting. There's this oscillation of the feet coming together and crossing with the flexion of the spine and the extension of the spine and the legs going out and the tail participating, every bit of the tail. So if we, even in the relative stillness of sitting at our instrument, can have that, a real empathy for that, that's a very different thing. I'll get out of this for a minute. We'll just try something together. One way of getting a sense of this is, my students respond well to this movement. I usually call this the Pope's wave or the Queen's wave. So everybody just try this on, very easy, very familiar. And if you have your hand hanging at your side to start, notice that is the most neutral place for your hand. Sorry about there. There we go. Basically, it's flat, a flat surface, like if you have your hand on the piano here. Your fingertips, the length of your thumb, and your wrist are all, and your arm are all in contact like that. So that's roughly a place where everybody's going to end up being neutral. And if that's what you carry up, and just try that wave. And as you do that, move around in space a little bit. And then what I'd like you to do is completely collapse and drop your hand and wrist. So it's really dead weight. And notice what happens in your system in response to that change. Since I can't see any of you, I'll model some responses that are typical. If your hand is free like that and you're slowly making this motion, if you flip your fingers, you'll notice they are springy, they're resilient, they return exactly to where they were. They are relaxed in the sense that they're not clenched and tight, but they're not at all relaxed in the sense of being collapsed. So there's no effort to keep them in that place. They're suspended in the system. We're going to follow up on this in this thing called the dart throwing motion in a few minutes. Another thing is when that support is in that system, that tensional network is supporting everything, as you move, you'll find that motion tends to extend. And as you do that, just slowly make that move. See if there's a spot that might feel a little stuck. Oftentimes people are a little presentational with their ribs, and then all of a sudden I'm extending out, but now I'm stretching away because there's not movement following here. That can happen in the hip joint. So just follow that around. I expect in this crowd, you'll get right down to the floor very easily. But then try this experiment where you just drop. And for most everyone, you can often see there's a little catch. And your anterior or lateral deltoid likely will just start to be doing a lot of work. Your trap can kick in. And interestingly enough, when that happens, the textbooks start to make sense. It's like, this is the muscle that does this thing. It sure feels it. It's getting uncomfortable very quickly. It's remarkable. But if I go back to this and just move around a little bit, it doesn't feel like there is a single muscle doing the work at all. And knowing what we do about tensegrity, it's like, well, yeah, the idea that this cable is doing all the work is silly. It doesn't look like that. And the experience of it when we do this is, okay, so just try that on a few more times. Yeah, it's like that muscle's doing everything. And now it's the whole tensional system. Another thing, when you drop here and you have this collapse, and then you go to lift it further, almost everybody ends up pushing their shoulder up. So all of a sudden I have shoulder dysfunction. No more scapular humeral rhythm, but when the system is now integrated because I don't have the collapse here, then there's the rotation of the scapula and everything just will tend to happen very organically for one change. So we know about the restrictions, the lack of joint play. First time I went to a chiropractor a couple of years ago, I had one of my ribs under my shoulder blade was just not moving, and he popped that, and all of a sudden my shoulder blade moved and I felt I had a connection with my arm. So one lock, we know this, but I don't think it's commonly talked about that a collapse in the system will create tension somewhere else, and essentially a collapse here will create that locking here. One image I always find fascinating is if you're holding a child and they're alert and looking around, and then they decide they're gonna have some fun, and they just collapse, they turn into dead weight. It's pretty fascinating how your experience of that is they weigh twice as much. We know they can't really weigh twice as much. Undoubtedly their center of gravity shifts a little bit, and that's part of it, but the experience is very much the same here. So my understanding is we have this active system that we're integrated with, and then so the forces are being communicated through the system the way it's designed, and we're now a global system. Tensegrity is here, so those forces are communicated down to the ground. But now this part of my body is not communicating the forces the way it's designed because I've collapsed it. There's no more consistent amount of springiness or tension in that system the way there was when we see the pictures of the ping pong and badminton and tennis players. I'm gonna share one other thing. There was a lot of things I wanted to get to today, and I realized that there's a video I did a few years ago, which I'll put the link in, for a conference down in Brazil, and I realized I just said it better there, so I'm going to play a little bit of this video, and then we'll come out and bring Melanie in and do some other things. Oops, I gotta share sound. I'll come do it one more time. Okay, if this doesn't work in some way, let me know. And finally, Snelson's needle tower. As you are probably aware, this is the structure that provided the light bulb moment to Dr. Levin as he was working to understand how the massive neck of a dinosaur could possibly support its own weight. It did not make sense as a compression structure. Notice how the struts in Snelson's tower seem to be floating and extending magically upwards. When our bodies are optimally organized and activated, there is a resulting sense of weightlessness. I hope you will all recognize this in yourselves. When this sense of weightlessness comes into the system, it is a phase change from feeling heavy to weightless. Citroens are known to have a very special hydraulic suspension system that makes the car seem to float. Imagine this was your car, but the suspension system was broken. It looks fine from the outside, but the ride would be rough. Getting around would be difficult. You might assume that this is just the way it is and could not get any better. Before this car starts, it is heavy. On ignition, it is buoyed up. This buoying up results from the activation of the car's hydropneumatic suspension system. This system creates and manages pressure. While this may seem like a fanciful analogy, we create stability and resilience in our bodies by managing intra-abdominal pressure. An important aspect of the biotensegral forces in our system is that they are also dynamically managed. Some of these forces result from the control of intra-abdominal pressure. Tensional forces provided by the cooperation of the diaphragm, abdominal muscles, pelvic floor, and intercostals are balanced by the compressive forces of the close-packed abdominal contents. To understand the phase shift from heaviness to lightness, we need to consider the question using the theoretical framework of biotensegrity. These are questions of the dynamics of the system. Dysfunction or pathology in the body of this type can be considered in the realm of dynamical disease. The most important practical question is, I believe, how can we determine how well a tensegrity is functioning? In a way, the question is not valid, since tensegrities always function optimally. The models do always function optimally, yet it is clear we do not. We also know that there are many effective therapeutic modalities for creating positive change, and it would be useful to have a framework to understand how these might actually work in biotensegral terms. It would also be useful to have a sense of how dramatic change can occur from a small change in a seemingly unrelated part of the body. Traditional models have a hard time explaining this. To determine how well something functions, it is useful to clarify what the function of the thing is. A tensegrity can be considered a medium that conducts mechanical energy. This mechanical energy carries information, and energy that carries information is a signal. A tensegrity structure is a communication network. Move one part and every part moves? That is communication. In the case of a tensegrity system, the signal is mechanical energy movement. The signal communicates through and throughout the structure, sequentially and simultaneously. In a network, it is possible that a signal can be communicated with zero loss of information. Sometimes there is distortion or loss of signal. Other times, it is not possible to connect to this network at all. Consider this Tom Fleming's tensegrity tower. Every external impulse is clearly communicated through and throughout the entire structure. Aside from structural damage, there are two ways that the system can fail. If there is a blockage in some part, notice that the mechanical signal, the information does not reach past the blockage. The other way that the system can fail is with collapse. Collapse somewhere in the structure will require a compensation of stiffening somewhere else. Notice in this image that both patterns of collapse and stiffening are present. Either way, the biotensegral system is impaired in its function as a communication network. This also means that other mechanical characteristics that we have in common with tensegrities will not be present until the structure is reintegrated. Viewed as a communication network, it is easy to see how small changes can block communication or reestablish communication. Sometimes a small change, like the locking of a wrist, can negatively affect the function of the whole body. Mobilizing a locked rib could reestablish the body's integration. Try doing what you see in this picture. Alert, happy, open, arms out, and in particular explore the open hands extending out and up. Notice how this unity of being creates physical integration and equal tonus. I just found out I was making noise and everybody could hear it. I apologize for that. I forget that. At this point, I would love to ask my lovely and brilliant colleague, Melanie Sever, to come down and talk about how she uses tensegrity in her own playing and in her teaching, and then we can go from there.
Thanks, Doug. So I have some thoughts I'd like to go through, but Doug, if you'd like to guide me through to demonstrate any particular thing that you would like, that would be great as well. So I'm a flutist and a conductor, and I work with students, mostly flutists at a high level, but all instrumentalists to some degree in the orchestra. And then I give movement lessons, basically body mapping, incorporating biotensegrity concepts and everything into that. And the one thing that Doug pointed out that's most important is to really define that tension. What is tension to us? How do we refer to what is happening in a musician's body, and how is that particular thing affecting their performance? You might think that we're talking just about the comfort of the musician, but we're really talking about the results that the musician can get. And it's really quite a remarkable thing that once you can hear certain things in the sound of a musician, you can actually understand what's contributing to that sound. You can hear tension in a certain part of the body. You can hear a lack of resonance. You can hear that the musician is not reaching their potential. And I'm going to demonstrate some of those things as to what we listen for and where we go to look for that, and how that comes into play specifically in a very applied manner. So there's so many places to start. I have like a million ideas running through my head, but I'm going to start with restrictions in the hand and how that affects. I'm going to play for you just my normal playing, hopefully with good optimal usage here, and I'll just play just a short phrase of music, and then I'll come back and I'll introduce different types of restriction into that, and you can hopefully, if the sound is working well, you can hear the effect of that in the actual just sound of the instrument. So now, if I were to lock my wrist, in fact, I'm only going to do this on one side of the body just to point out how much of an effect it has. So I'm going to have a setup here, a way of holding this that's going to introduce tension into my wrist, which this is a very common thing that you'll actually see in flutists a lot of the time, in young flutists, but also older ones. I'm going to have my wrist sort of jammed a little bit here as I'm approaching this. And this has the effect of making all of my fingers less springy. So if I were to play something very technical, it would be stiffer and not quite as fluid. I'll demonstrate that as well, but I'm going to play this same phrase of music two different ways. Actually, I'll do it 3 times. I'll do it the way I just did it, I'll do it with this pushed in and immobilized, and then I'll come back to the freed up motion again, and hopefully you'll hear the contrast. So. And then back to it. Now, I'd love to hear if that was actually audible, if the difference was audible to you.
Well, I can speak for me, obviously, very,
Yes. I would say we'll get a million people unmuting if you just ask open questions.
That's great.
What was interesting to me is that rhythmically it sounded more locked.
Right, and that's
It
such a
manifested in the rhythm.
absolutely, that's such a great point. The immobilization in one area affects your perception of what's going on as well. It makes you less rhythmically integral. It makes you less technically smooth, and it all interferes with your musical intention, which comes through all of the physical attributes of what it takes to play the phrase, involving the production of sound, the line of the phrase, where the highlight of the phrase is, and the rhythm and steady pulse of it. All of those things are interrupted by any sort of locking or mechanical restriction in the body. And this can occur in different areas. I'll demonstrate also, like, I can just simply, a lot of us, let's see if I can get this to show me in this part of my body here. A lot of us will, as we approach the instrument here, have like a sort of a slouch back, so that we're here and forward like this. And as soon as we do that, it affects how the AO joint in here, how the head is balanced over the body. So as soon as I do that with my hips, I'm tucked in here and I'm very rigid here, instead of having this nice floating springy reaction. And so when I bring my flute up and I do that, I also get a restriction. Let's see here. Do something a little higher here. I just started a little cramp in my back by doing that. Okay. All right. So clearly not a healthy move, right? So here's where I'm balanced and free and responsive. And even moving, not even in just one spot. I almost can't help myself from moving with the feeling of the music when I'm free to. And then here is when I've thrown my weight back a little bit and caused a lot of things to lock. So like my thighs are holding, they're flexed because they're trying to make me not fall backwards. My head, my AO joint is pushed backwards a little bit because I'm also trying to not fall backwards. It's just that kind of response. Now, that sounds like an extreme, but a lot of us actually are set up not to be in balance as we're walking, right? Not to be springy, or as we're standing, or when we lift up an object and we're in relation to it, we sometimes then the object becomes the important thing and we forget about our bodies, or things like that.
and Melanie, it also, and it's happening in your voice even before we get to the flute.
Sure, absolutely. So here it is, with freedom, then with the locking, just by the balance of going back on my heels a little bit, and then by the freedom of playing again. I even forgot it. I've played that like 1,000 times in my life at least, right? And here it is again. So you can hear just in something so seemingly simple that it has an immediate effect on the quality of playing. I am playing each of those times to my maximum ability under the circumstances. Yet when I'm moving and more responsively and freely, I'm the sound is just so much more resonant, and there's so much more available to play with. So it really maximizes the potential of what I can achieve with that. Sorry, I don't know how to turn that off. All right. One of the things that that I thought that Doug, I think I really like this language. I just want to reinforce this about habitual restrictions. Sometimes it's hard to tell whether something is a habit or whether it requires intervention. And I think that sometimes the answer is in both. Sometimes we can find that we've had a habit that has affected us for a long time, and we actually need some sort of intervention to get us over that habit or to repair some sort of physical thing that has resulted in as a result of having that type of habit, of holding that much tension, of moving in a certain way over many years. You might need some intervention of some sort of massage therapy, physical therapy of some sort, and various other things. So I think that when we're looking at other musicians and at ourselves as we continually try to improve our performances, we're looking at maximizing the musical result, but also there's no way to really separate that from the physical health and physical well-being of the musician themselves. If it sounds great, it's probably going to feel great for those of us who are mortals. I think that there are some people who do some extraordinary things and end up damaging themselves later on. But I think for most people, if it feels healthy, you're going to maximize the performance. Doug, do you have something?
Yeah, I agree 100%. And one of the things that just sort of reminded me of is, I think something we both really enjoy doing is, I'll turn on my video, there we go, is triage essentially. Somebody comes in for assistance, and it could be, it can be crisis, or it could just be, I feel stuck. And there's so many different things interfacing in that experience of sitting down with your instrument, and what is the thing. And sometimes that pattern of tension can be, you find out that I dislocated my shoulder, so that guarding response is just deep seated in that part of me. And that's something, if I try to, unless I really respect that voice coming from here, then I end up having trouble, and you can't see it just looking at it. So there's so many things, and those things that teachers said many years ago. But I would love to hear you talk about as well, is how musical intention can actually, on the one hand, it can create ideal organization, but a musical intention where the musicianship is not as developed and is not sure, can actually be the primary cause of moving that's might be hurting them, but it's certainly part of what's limiting them in their performance.
Yeah, I'm totally behind the starting with musical intention. That also requires a certain level of ability, or a certain level of what's the word? A level of
Musicianship?
musicianship with but what is musicianship, if we wanted to describe that? It requires a certain level of accomplishment in a person to understand what they're looking for in musical intention. If you're working with anyone who has played for a few years, even who has some idea of what they're working with in the music, musical intention is really about directing how the notes and rhythms and pulse of the phrases are going to deliver the meaning in the music, the emotional highlights, it's done through how you're applying dynamics, variation in your sound for those of us who make vibrato, um, uh, the feeling of growing or releasing intensity in the music, and having a really clear idea of that organizes everything towards the pulse in the music, towards the highlight of it, and you immediately send signals to your body to move in that way. If you have an idea in the music that that is really not aligned with how the phrase works the best way, it oftentimes creates a blockage. I think this is what you're talking about. It will oftentimes create a blockage in the doing of it. So you get you'll get discoordinated in playing a lot of fast music if you're not grouping it correctly and playing towards a beat. Yes, go ahead.
I got something for you to demonstrate. So,
Okay.
play a couple phrases with breaths in between, and have the end of the phrase and the breath, everyone be an ending and a restarting, and have one where you breathe where the line is continuing through the silence.
Okay, sure. All right. Okay.
Okay.
And then,
Yeah, do it just maybe 2 note phrases and take more breaths. You know, dee 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 dum ba
Okay,
dum, or I could just do that, and then
Sure,
people will go
yeah.
dee dee da dum.
yeah, exactly. Like I can hardly do that. But
Yeah,
that's
so
very
I mean that is definitely a musical maturity thing,
it
where
is.
you realize. I mean, a way you can just say it is you realize when when a sentence, when there's a period of the end of the sentence, there's another sentence coming, and the end of the paragraph isn't really the end of the chapter, and the end of the chapter isn't the end of the book. But as musicians are developing, there's all sorts of ways where we feel like we've completed a task. Good. Okay, now I have another task. Instead of realizing that there's continuity. A way I can show you on the piano. There's so that's WCP. So there's this. This happens here, and then there's something up there. So I can think, I did this good, and now I'm going to go, and then I do this again. But instead of, so I'm going to stay here, because this is where the melody is. So I didn't fragment, and it's easy to do because each one of those things is hard. And then I'm going to go here. Even if I play this really well, and I still do that and break it up. So every time I do that, in the process, this is one of the things related to what we were talking about earlier, I'm likely to, since I don't have the intention of continuity, and there, look, my hands supported, and you hear the connection to that sound. But if I do this, and I think, oh, I did that good, this is what people that come off like this, and then they go, and so that the fragmentation of the support and the dropping is the result of not understanding that music doesn't stop, even though there are something did finish and I have to move somewhere else, and there are different tasks in that sense, but I need to put them all together in one continuity. And also, you know, like little kids will sit down and they go, I'll just start playing, realizing the music really comes from the silence. You know, it's already there. And the end too, that it goes into the silence. And so the support, that's hard. I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, I see people in professional orchestras that are breaking every phrase with the breath. It makes me kind of nuts sometimes. So there's all sorts of levels of that.
I think for people who don't play an instrument, I think that we all relate intuitively to dance. And I think it's the same as doing a choreographed piece where you know, you do your part, another person does their part, but you don't stop relating to what else is going on stage. As we're playing different parts within the same musician in the same piece of music or with other musicians, we are constantly alert and relating to what's going on with that. It's a continuation. You're always engaged. You're always on the path of that engagement. You know.
One more quick one. Susan's coming in.
Yeah.
Yes. Go ahead, one quick one, because then yeah, go for
Questions? Okay. So, you know, if we were talking and while you were telling me something was really important to you, I went over here and started looking at my phone and playing with other things. It's really clear that I'm not really listening to you. And music, this is particularly true with piano when you're stirring lots of pots. So the melody is here, so this is a song. That's the important part. So if I do this, those notes are far away, so it's easy to say, well, I need to make sure I get to those notes, but in doing that, I'm pulling attention away from the most important part. I don't need to go down there. And yeah, I mean, there's so many fascinating little things like that could end up hurting, believe it or not. Intensity is the other big one. How do we add intensity to the music? And the tendency is, this is a universal thing, confusing effort with power. And the bearing down, conductors, you see, they want to make a big sound and they go, and it's like, I don't want to see somebody do it. You can be up and there's so much more power and resonance in that, but it's such a universal thing, and all instrumentalists have attended violence. Well, that's not where the sound comes from. So once again, that's a musical intention that's just a little misguided. But it's important to respect the desire for intensity is right. It's just how we're getting there. So Susan, please come back. I think we have some questions here.
We do. You know, but on your point, that you were just making.
I think maybe we should go to some questions. Looks like we have some.
Okay, we do. But I wanted a comment question from me. I put myself first.
That's your right. No,
it's just the thing you're talking about. So if somebody, this is something I want just a clarification on, or just to expand on it. If somebody, for an artistic reason, wants to appear stilted, okay, for it's the part of the character, or it's a characteristic of the song, or how you want to be conveying the song, you end up, I think, to me, doing a presentation of the stiltedness, or maybe even going into it, but some part of you is not compromising that global distribution of intention. Do you know what I'm saying? And Absolutely. Then related to that, okay, and there are other questions too, but I think possibly related to that, Nuno's on a train, so he can't ask the question. You mentioned phase shift from heaviness to lightness. He wants to hear more about that. How do you see that expressed in the body during movement? So to me, they're maybe related. Or maybe not. It's up to you.
I mean, I heard Kate Blanchett once in an interview, and I've always come back to this. She said the most important thing that you learn in acting school is the difference between feeling an emotion yourself and getting the audience to feel that emotion. And I mean, that just applies to everything. When you're, if the character is having a breakdown on stage, it's a very different thing than the actor having a breakdown on stage. That don't play. That's embarrassing, and you never want that to happen. Whispering on stage, right? I mean, when people whisper so that no one hears them, everybody in the audience hears them. And so whatever the thing is that's being communicated, I like how you said it's being presented, but it's so they understand it, and it can never be the thing.
No, that's great.
I
that
just want to.
The phase change thing. Go ahead, Melanie. Sorry.
I just wanted to throw in that some of the greatest demonstrations of this are in our opera singers. They're required to do all sorts of crazy things in all different positions and emote in all different ways, and they have to project the way an opera singer does. Everything has to be working perfectly all the time, and you can bet that they're not actually becoming stilted or whatever it ends up being. They're functioning beautifully the whole time.
Because how could you?
The wonderful thing that shows is you don't have to be standing up straight with both feet on the ground to have the mechanism working, right? When so many people, that's how it's presented as an ideal.
And so one thing I talk about is sustainability. You're finding a sustainable thing because you couldn't. I mean, often in opera, someone's committing suicide. You can't do that 6 days a week for months on end without. You have to find a way to make it a sustainable performance.
That's such a part of musical maturity, like understanding, the difference between a high school musical where it's maximum everything and that's not sustainable. And it's a great experience and it's age appropriate for a 16-year-old, but it's not for a professional. And I used to be a trauma player, some of you may know that, and I asked my teacher in the BSO, who's really astoundingly great musician and very passionate musician, I said, when you're playing that Mahler symphony, do you feel it? Do you feel that completely? And he just looked at me like I was crazy. He said, if I felt that completely, I wouldn't be able to play a note. Like, what do you think? But that's the thing as we're growing up, people don't want to let go of feeling everything like that, like an adolescent. But that's it's the ages of man stuff.
And that also, Tabitteau, who was one of the great woodwind pedagogues that affected the American School of Woodwind Playing, basically. His whole system was to assign a number of intensity to every note in a phrase, so that no matter how he felt on a particular night, he'd be able to deliver the same level of intensity of emotion in a phrase, and not leave it up to chance. So that's kind of also an interesting way to
and understanding that it's an effect, which sometimes musicians don't like to hear that because they want everything to be utterly real. But the important part is that you've created the effect and the audience has received that message, and it's understanding how to do it sometimes.
Yeah. I want to invite people to use the raise hands function. We've got a couple of things in the chat, so I'll go through those first. Jason Rita, Doug, is talking about where I quote you in my book. Gravity is not an active part of its cohesiveness. And he wants to know what paper that's from, but I think you said it. It's something you say. You said it in presentations and yeah.
There it is.
I just love the way you put it together. So I felt you deserved the credit.
Thank you.
There's also
Oh, Steve.
Janet Zeitlin. Janet, did you want to come on? Oh yeah, okay. Now we've got hands up.
Let's put Steve in here.
Here I am. I'm here. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Steve, I'll get to you in a second. Sorry, and I'll get to Susan Koning's question. Jenny, you want to turn on your video?
Sure. What do I look like back here?
And Janet, do you mind just telling everybody how you apply biotensegrity, even though that's not where your question is?
Well, I'm an attorney and I'm a mediator. I've been a mediator for 99,000 years, and I teach mediation skills to law students at the University of Miami. And I've been developing ever since I started my MFR treatment. I'm going to give you a little longer version. Ever since I started my MFR treatment 6 years ago.
That's John Barnes myofascial.
John Barnes myofascial release with the fabulous Cynthia Gonzalez, who is also a professor at the university in the chair that Carol Davis used to teach I started realizing the connections and all of these, and I attended, and I had nothing else to do during COVID. I attended all of these BiotensegriTea parties and just was so enthralled by everybody being so excited about these concepts that I started thinking about how it applies to what I do. And as a mediator, my job is to guide people through discussions of how to resolve their differences. And in order for that to work, there are certain precepts that are the basis of it. One is confidentiality. One is neutrality or impartiality of the mediator. And the third is the self-determination of the parties. I'm very excited. I'm going to show you something. I just got it. This is what I have. This is my tensegrity model, and made by Christian. I have to give him credit, Christian Castro Armas. And what this is it's a picture of a mediation. This is your plaintiff. This is your defendant. And this is your mediator. And what I do is I now have a demonstration. I don't know if I can do it real quickly or not, but you see how it all collapses and I like the collapsing of it because that helps me explain the importance of, as a mediator, of us enforcing those rules and making sure that wait, now I can't do everything at the same time. But making sure that the rules are adhered to, making sure that they honor their neutrality, that they honor confidentiality, and that they give self-determination to the parties. And so and I just got this. And I did.
So what are the emerging properties?
What?
What are the emerging properties when all those things come together?
What do you mean emerging properties?
What's the benefit then when everything's working?
The benefit is, okay, so this is the subject of the discussion. This is the agreement they need to come to. And without the help of somebody who's neutral, they couldn't do this. So what happens is while they're having their conversations and you're balancing it off, making, they're going to be pulling and tugging all the time, and you're the guy that's balancing it. And once they do that, it's like a tent. And so you hammer it. Once they sign the agreement, they hammer it into the ground, and then you can let go of all the tension elements. Isn't that great? I have another one that's the whole legal system.
So are you saying?
Cool. But I, as a musician, though, let's get back to your subject.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you.
Because I am also a flutist. And so I was really enjoying listening and seeing what you were talking to. And I would love to continue a conversation with you, Melanie. But
Sure.
this was one of my favorite conferences I've ever been to. So thank you all. That's it.
Thanks.
That's great. Steve, we'll go to you and then we'll go to Susan.
Well, I just want to go back to dynamical diseases, which I forgot. I've been focusing on the theoretical and not getting into the practical. And of course, I started with dynamical diseases originally. And I want to show you where that concept came from, was actually from this book. Let me see, I probably ought to shut off my video, whatever it is here, so you can see it. I can't get it.
I think if you hold it lower, we could maybe see the book.
All right, well, let me get back to it here. All right,
Or Steve,
Yeah.
hold it right.
Yeah, just like
there
that.
it is. Perspectives in Bio and Theoretical Medicine. That's a 1987 conference of the New York Academy of Medicine. And let me read you a couple of lines from here. You have to understand, this is my library. We have been aware for at least 2 centuries that everything can be wrong and nothing is wrong. That the motion of systems and not their anatomy frequently defines a disorder. And I then moved to the one here that dynamic. It's actually titled Dynamical Diseases by some neurologists. And so, but it never got out of the, for some reason or other, here was a major conference on it, and it's never gotten out into the world like it should be. And it clearly is a concept that needs to be explored and utilized at much greater depth. There's no question that the biotensegrity system certainly is, major thing is a dynamical disease concept. And I'm so glad that Doug and Mary are working on this concept for and keeping it alive. Joint play was given to me by John Manel when I worked with him in 1963 or 4 or something like that. So he talked about joint concept, but I really got together when I ran into this dynamical disease concept. And thank you for that. And of course, you're carrying on you're doing what should be done with biotensegrity, is taking it from the theoretical to the practical, and that's great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Susan Koenig, you want to come up? Let's see. Hold on. You're going to need to unmute.
All right, thank you. I'm on 2 devices, so you see, because I have a family situation I have to deal with, maybe. I love the practicality of this presentation. There are a lot of gems in here for me because of the practicality. One thing I really liked was being able to be flexible and toggle between old model language and coming into the biotensegrity model. I think that's really helpful because everybody I come in contact with is way into the old model, and any concept of fascia and biotensegrity is absent in their awareness, or almost absent. So I really like the way you were able to toggle. My issue is around fatigue when you're sustaining an activity, and a lot of the population, I'm an older person now, I'm 80 now, and a lot of my current clients are older people, and fatigue is one of their biggest issues. They love learning all this stuff. In fact, they're more enthusiastic learners than many of my younger people. But fatigue and sustaining a sense of alertness, they start out really well. They sit down, they feel their feet, they feel their sits bones, they get their fluid act together, and then they begin to lose it and become discoordinated and unfunctional and go back into pain, and they don't necessarily have the option always of just stopping and resting. And so I'm just curious how you deal with that because, I mean, even musicians in an orchestra or in chamber music or any of that, they have to sustain for a performance. How do they deal with fatigue, and what are your suggestions?
Melanie, I can jump in if you want. We can
Uh,
probably both have thoughts.
Yeah, we can both have thoughts. You want to go first?
Um, sure. I mean, there was in vogue a few years back in the Performing Arts Medicine Association was the idea that musicians are athletes. And I think there's definitely there's some obvious benefits of saying that, right? We're saying, you know, you need to train, you need to take care of your nutrition, and you know, it's a full body thing, even if you don't get it and stuff like that. But one of the things that is also really clear is that, you know, professional athletes, they're done early. You know, I had this for a presentation a while back, Andre Agassi and Steffi Graf sitting in the stands, and I think they were like 29 or something, 32. They were so young. But when I go to the Boston Symphony, there are players in their 70s, you know, and violinists that are playing these big pieces all day long. So there's clearly something fundamentally different in what's sustainable and how that works. And the conclusion I've come to is with athletes, what's really clear is it's all about maximum endurance, lifting the most, running the fastest, and and in ways that are using the body, acceleration, explosion, all those things. Whereas musicians, you can have Rubinstein and Horowitz playing when they're 80, playing as well as they ever played. And by the way, playing pieces that if you don't play them well, you can't play a page of them. You will not have the stamina because you haven't figured out how to deal with this effort versus power. And the single point of clarity I think that could be the most helpful is that with a musician, the effort is being distributed through the entire body. And what people don't get often is they try to put it all in their hand, all in their arm, all from their shoulder down. And when you really start to get that's distributed equally through the entire body, which you can see when you watch all those great musicians, then they have the ability to do those things, and they have the focus and then the stamina. I mean, I expect there's limits. Well, there has to be limits, but still, that's the one thing that comes to mind. And it sounds like what you're doing is when you're working with these people and you're getting them on their sit bones and moving all the way through, that you are working on getting that. But I'm just curious if, and I suppose you're educating them to understand what they're doing as well. But when they're working in the garden or whatever, if that's always the focus, I think that's what comes to mind at least.
Yeah, a couple thoughts come to my mind as well. One is as you're making changes, you have to do it in small increments until it becomes the new habitual way of moving, till it becomes the first choice of the body and mind as you're moving. And until that point, it's an extra effort and it's extra exhausting to make those changes. That being said, when you make changes for better movement, it's immediately energy returning. But that you do build up with that. And on the longevity, as I look around the orchestra that I play in, I mean, I'm 61. I'm by no means the oldest person in the orchestra. You know, in fact, there's very few people younger than me, if we're looking at it. So it's interesting to look around the orchestra and just realize that everybody has been through their bouts with physical challenges for various reasons throughout their lives, not just related to playing, but affecting their playing, and that everybody is always searching for a way to have more longevity in it. And I think it's really looking for these efficiencies. What maximizes our performance potential also maximizes our longevity to be able to do that. When we're young, we can throw everything at a problem, right? We have extra energy to waste and throw around it. And as we get older, it's more and more important to refine that so that we can continue to do that. And we do continue to do it. We do it better than our younger selves most of the time, but it's also a necessary element for us in that. So.
I appreciate how you said that a lot of people have stories that aren't apparent when you watch them. You know, sometimes people will say, "Oh, your playing is so effortless." It's like, honey, you have no idea what you know, what I'm. He's like, I'm glad it appears that way, and in many ways it is now compared to what it was. But the road to get there is something that ideally people don't see.
Thanks, Susan. Bob?
Thank you. Thank you, Melanie and Doug. Really enjoyed it. Since you've been talking about whole body dynamics and efficiencies, what occurred to me is just a quick question for each of you. One is, Melanie, what differences do you notice playing your individual instruments, standing versus sitting down? Because I see Melanie, I see you standing. Like, do you notice a difference? Do you have to adjust when you're sitting? Do you have to move your upper trunk? And Doug, I've seen a lot of keyboardists play standing up as opposed to sitting. What differences do you notice between those two positions?
I feel that I can play equally well in both, but that standing up provides me with naturally better access to my breath. I have a little more ease in accessing pelvic floor response and whatnot, and that affects my breathing, which affects everything else. I've learned how to access that and support it when I'm playing in a chair, but it's a very specific setup that I have in order to feel that. Yeah, it's just a different relationship.
I've just had a couple of experiences playing standing up, performing standing up at a keyboard when I was kind of out in front with the horn players, and it was just the dynamic of it was awesome. And yeah, I mean, being really, that thing I was demonstrating earlier with the Debussy, I would be moving up the keyboard was coming from the sit bones, but doing that over the feet is just, it's just so much more dynamic. Yeah, it would be fun to do that more. There's a famous pianist, somebody you may know named Keith Jarrett, who's rather short, and he often would crouch down and stand when he played, move around, and for him that was obviously he enjoyed it because he did it a lot, and that would be fun. But yeah, you have advantages if you're a little more Napoleonic that way.
Yeah, that's what I would expected each of you to say, but I was just curious to see whether that was indeed true of my understanding. I know it's getting late. One quick question. I'm a manual therapist, and I remember treating years ago a guitar player who was telling me that his hands was always cramping, and just watching him play, I noticed something you had mentioned earlier, Doug, is that he would always play with his wrist just was completely flexed the entire time, moving along, and thinking that just he's getting compression of maybe the vasculature because of finger flexors, but now I can just see it's just locked and he can't move. So it was really interesting when that demonstration before, because it just brought back to mind that situation. So thank you for your time.
One of the things I've been exploring a lot recently is there's this. I'm just going to show this video really quickly because it's worth it. This is it's called a dart throwing motion. It's not reflex isn't the right word. It's really a motion that's just, it's the natural way we're organized. What Steve has talked about, similar things that, for instance, a frog leg, that it's not that every muscle in the frog's leg needs to fire in coordination, that the way those multi-bar kinematic chains are organized is you can have one muscle flick and the whole thing moves. There's the jaw, the mantis shrimp. And the thing about this is you can have just if we start in this Pope's wave position, just a little flick of the wrist, if there's not a restricting of where the fingers are going to be, automatically opens the hand. And it does a couple of things. So it extends the fingers, but it also flattens out the palm. And when you move in the other direction, it the fingers flex and the palm cups. And so your fingers naturally come together. The other thing is, if you do this, you'll notice it when you draw it back, comes towards your eye and right towards your sternoclavicular joint. And when you move in the opposite direction, as you're flexing your wrist, it's actually going into ulnar deviation. So you get this diagonal motion. And it's incredibly practical on instruments. For violinists, when they're out near the scroll, then that's the position they need to be in. That's the throwing of the dart, and that gets them up the neck. And so I've done this presented this to my students recently and at Berkeley, and there's times so much what we do at instruments is actually just modulating your hand shape. Certain instruments are kind of relatively fixed, like a saxophone player, but a guitarist needs to be here sometimes and here sometimes. And if you try coming into this position and then straighten your fingers, it takes a ton of work. And the opposite true as well. If you're here and then you bring your fingers in, there's a lot of strain. So when an instrumentalist can say, okay, now that's an open shape and now it's a more closed shape, and allow that natural organization to create that, this is the most neutral, but this is also neutral, and this is also neutral, in that there's no flexor or extensor activity to make that change of hand shape. And I came upstairs because of my internet, but at the piano, there's times when you're here and then you need to be here. So almost all the fingers together. If I'm in this position and then I push my fingers out, it's miserable. But if I just flick my wrists, then I'm in that other position. And once again, my fingers are completely springy and open. And yeah, that's gold.
And if you have to be in one part of that particular position for most of your playing, like a flute, like the left hand on a flute, you'll see it's like sort of a modified mid dart throw, right?
Yeah.
It's important that everything up the chain here is in a position to allow that. So you don't want to be anywhere where it's restricting this sort of ease of motion here. So that can be the turn at the elbow, the turn at the shoulder. So all of that matters, and then you can continue going all the way up the chain on that one and see what's affecting the freedom of movement on that.
Yeah, from a Tai Chi perspective, that flick of the wrist is in the belly.
Sure. Yeah.
In other words, it manifests in the wrist.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're doing it right, you're grounded, whether it's your feet or your sits bones, and all that. And it's coming up through, it's directed by your center and then manifests in the flicking.
And it's also fascinating. You can right now I'm making that motion with my wrist, with the wrist flexors, but also now I'm not at all. What I'm doing is extending my fingers and just flipping my fingers out, and that's moving my wrist. So it doesn't. There's not only one way that motion can happen either. It's like, but the organization is such that that's the place of least work. That's the place of least energy, and whatever gets me there, that's the organization.
That's good. Jeroen's going to come up and ask his question.
Hi there. Can you understand? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. A couple of weeks ago, we had some people talking about ecological psychology, and they were discussing also a concept of the haptic array, which is basically the neuromyofascial network of haptic perception, which feels and communicates movement through the entire body, basically. And I was wondering if you were talking about locking, tightening, freezing, and relinquishing support and stuff. So would you say that this restricts the transfer of haptic information through the body?
100%. That was one of the things I wanted to get to, so thank you. And yeah, so if I'm a violinist, and I like the image of sonar buoys. you have sonar buoys through the ocean, and so something moves somewhere, and then there's the waves are going through the ocean, but if you can also imagine that somehow you partition out different parts of the ocean so that signal doesn't transfer, and the image you would get would be much more limited because you'd only have a couple of those sonar buoys that could hear it. So I of course I have a sense of touch here, but if I've locked my ribs or locked my hip, the acuity of my senses in terms of the touch here is much less. The sense of balance, the sense of the way that this relates to the contact of the bow, all those things. Another one that's fascinating, if you just oscillating side to side and you lock your ribs, one of the things that happens when the system's integrated, you're not locked, your sense of rhythm is much better. That's Melanie was mentioning that earlier when she was playing that, and it's an uncanny thing. But our internal pulse, when we're not holding something, is so clear. And I don't know the mechanism of it, but that's less important than knowing how to access it and knowing what's actionable. And the same, that has to be part of the haptic system, it seems, just from experience, that when you're moving all the way through, you can feel the pulse of a breath. Not to mention, if a conductor is communicating that and they're not locked, we have that physical empathy for that, and we understand it. If I just locked and I try to do that with just my arms, oh my God, that orchestra would be not able to follow. But this, it's uncanny, the difference. So yeah, it expresses itself in terms of your sense of contact, moving the key, all those things, but also rhythmically. Awesome.
Cool. So are you aware of ecological psychology playing a role in music, perhaps?
I need to go back and watch that webinar.
Thanks for answering.
Thank you for the question.
Thanks, Jeroen. So there's a question in the chat from Jason Rita. Doug, did your somatic awareness and biotensegrity journey improve the focal dystonia that you experienced when you were a trombonist, as well as the piano-related chronic pain that you wrote about in my book?
Oh, you did some deep digging. Well,
It is good for the deep dives.
yeah. The trombone, the only thing that fixed the trombone was just not playing for 20 years. And then when I was able to pick it up after all that time, I was able to play again, but I had another life in music at that point. So yeah, it was too late for that. Absolutely this thing, I quit playing trombone when I was in college, when I was getting a master's degree in performance, and switched to piano, and then I over practiced, and that's what really set me down this path. I met a great teacher that helped me through this, and he was really teaching me all these things, but he didn't have the language for it. And so finding biotensegrity and meeting Steve and that was that just, I think it's like a lot of our stories that made sense. A thing I like to say is that there's a definition of tensegrity is that it's forces made visible. I like to say it's forces made palpable, because for most of us, when we picked up those structures and it's like, yes, that's what's going on. And it's such a deep thing. And yeah, it's a deep well.
And are you guys both teaching body mapping? How does that relate to biotensegrity? I don't think you've talked a lot about that. And then I'm not sure what other courses Jason's talking about. KI courses?
Oh, wow. Kinematic integration. That's what I named
it. Okay. Of course, right.
I haven't really been using that so much. I mean, simply put, our map is our image of ourselves, and if I say your left knee, your left knee comes into your mind, and what you picture, that's your map. It's a paradigm, and a mismapping would just be a misunderstanding. So the when we shift to a paradigm of biotensegrity, we're shifting our map of ourselves. So it's parallel just to that when and we tend to find what we're looking for and what we expect. We tend to find what we expect. So if I'm standing and I think my spine needs to be straight and that it's like a stack of blocks, when I lean like this, I'm going to experience it that my lower back is working really hard to keep me from being, falling over. But if I have the image of something else, then there's no extra energy cost to move. And so there's just so many things through the body. The thumb appears to be short. People tend to pull their thumb away from here and lock when you realize your thumb is actually coming from down here and it's so mobile. Then that shift. And the thing is, obviously, this is better because you're using the tool that you have and you're using it the way it's designed. But the thing that we can understand is that it isn't just a local thing. It isn't just getting a new tool. That if I pull the end of my thumb out and my wrist locks when I'm holding the flute, then I can't breathe and my tone isn't as good and I can't feel rhythm. I mean, there's these cascade of negative effects from a lock that's happening. But the helpful thing is, if I just know it's tight, I can't release it. When I realize that my wrist is locking because I misunderstand how my thumb is structured, that's actionable at that point. That gives me a tool to deal with the issue.
Sounds like emergent properties can work both for the positive and the negative.
Receding properties, exactly.
Sorry, Melanie, go ahead.
No, that's good. I noticed as soon as I moved to the movement paradigm of biotensegrity in my presentations and in working with people, it connected intuitively with what people's experiences were, and I've noticed that just putting everything in that context, underlying it, it's really much easier to talk about movement with people. It's also easier for me when I'm assessing, or as Doug put it, triaging. It's easier to, I rarely look at the point of pain or the one point of the problem that the person is generally complaining about. I'm always looking upstream more, and that will more often than not solve the issue that they came in for. So it's an interesting point of view.
We might get a last word from Steve Levin, but before that, Doug, maybe when you were showing the photograph of Michael Jordan, you said something about maybe the tongue, and you said we'll come back to that later.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
This later.
This is sometimes I've heard people say a number of times to in meditation things to relax, to let your tongue, just relax your tongue and let it follow the bottom of your mouth. And if you look for that, you can kind of get it to happen. But I think, in case everybody doesn't know what auxetic means, that when my model's downstairs. When a tensegrity gets longer, it expands on every dimension or contracts on every dimension. Whereas if you pull up, thank you very much. Whoops, hold it down a little bit, it's disappearing. There we go. Ah, yes. So expands or contracts in every dimension. Whereas most things where if you pull it this direction, whoops, it tears. It stretches, it gets longer here and narrower here. And our tongue is such a good example of something that's clearly auxetic. If you pull your tongue into the back of your mouth, it will get smaller in all dimensions. And if you put your tongue out of your mouth and just really be aware of this possibility that it's expanding in all dimensions. And then one way you can think about this auxetic balance is that there's that place we talk about of least effort is between the direction of expansion or the direction of contraction. There's a place that's neutral. And if you consider that with your tongue, if you really release your tongue, if you have it in the back of your mouth and really release it, it will tend to expand into your mouth and come up to the roof of your mouth. If you do it the other direction, you end up like Michael Jordan there, which it's interesting how free he was with that. But I can't talk and do this at the same time to demonstrate, but let your tongue go out of your mouth and really expand, and then just release it and see how far it'll come back. But there's a place where it's really full and it's still expansive compared to what we might think of it. But as you do that, notice how free your jaw will tend to be, how free your AO joint will tend to be. Notice how free your breathing is when you're, and then if you're going to dribble a basketball and go shoot, I mean, he was onto something clearly. But that's such a great way for people to experience how their body works differently than they expected. But it's also, it's actionable. It's a tool. Lots of people complain about jaw tension, TMJ. They say, I have TMJ. I like to say, everybody has a TMJ. You have a syndrome. But when you really release there, it just tends to free. And the neck, the back of the neck, all those things.
What's interesting is in Tai Chi, we put the tip of the tongue on the roof of the mouth, and then it goes up and back, and that releases the jaw. So it's interesting how you can have different configurations to create that improved arrangement. Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
Well, I would just want to know how this is accepted in the music community. Are you people outliers, or is it coming into acceptance?
Melanie?
Yeah, everybody I work with is amazed and thankful and really grateful. And I have students that I've taught for years now. They're bringing it into the schools with younger students, and they're thrilled to have that as a tool. All of my colleagues that I've worked with have received benefit from it and they're hook, line, and sinker in it.
Particularly where it's coming into the schools, Melanie. Maybe you could give me more information at some point about that. That's something at the archive we like to track. Where is biotensegrity starting to slip under the fence and get inside the academic zone?
This is just part of the vision. I mean, this is sort of an offshoot, I think, of all of the music educators that are involved with the Association for Body Mapping Education. There's a segment of us now that incorporate biotensegrity in our language of teaching, and anywhere that we contact students, especially teachers in training, and wherever they end up going, this language is starting to filter down into secondary and sometimes elementary education. But just that a whole awareness. This is the vision of starting to spread better awareness and better paradigms for body movement. I suppose that until anatomy physiology is taught from this perspective, in some ways, we won't have wide acceptance. But I think that this, every little bit opens people and readies them for this knowledge.
Great.
Well, thank you. That's very exciting to me that it's spreading.
Me too.
Yes. Great. Doug, maybe you could give us a closing toast. We don't have any other questions. We're almost at a 2-hour mark here. And boy, did the time absolutely fly. Yeah. Oh, I have a question about Ain't Misbehaving', if I may.
Oh, sure.
How much of that improv was planned, and how much of that improv is it's just what comes out right now?
More the second.
Yeah.
I mean, I've known the song a long time, and so there's a certain, it's like I'm walking around the park that I've been around a different time and maybe did a couple little pirouettes in different places, but it's familiar.
Different at the time.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to take our spotlights off so that we can see anybody who wants to jump in on the toast. You can turn on your camera and you can turn on your mic, and then we can all be together. Over to you, Doug.
Well, just with gratitude, thank you everybody, thank you, Steve, always, especially, it's a joy to be together, and I'm grateful to be able to share with Melanie and share these things. Here's to a happy summer if you're in the north of the world.
Hi.
Happy.
Cheers. Thank you.